Cocktail Sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
So thank you so much for, to Tech Cocktail and for the Downtown Project for bringing all of us here for this great exchange of ideas and thoughts. And, my entire career has been at this very dynamic point between technology and storytelling and where they come together. And so kind of it makes sense for me to talk about narratives and storytelling and hopefully how, that potentially relates to business and startups. But there's another backstory to this, which is very interesting, and it kind of goes back to when Tony was doing his book tour. And so if you can just in the high retina display in your head, because no slides were allowed, if you can just visualize the Maslow's pyramid, which very quickly to recap, at the base, it's about kind of human need, if you will, and it's such a basic thing. But at the base of the pyramid, you have things that are very fundamental, like just shelter, food, sex, all of these things. And then you move up into the pyramid into things that have more engagement, that describe passion. And then as you move further up into that pyramid, it becomes about self-actualization and who we are and what we, why do we do what we do and how do we bring meaning into our lives. So that's kind of the basic Maslow's hierarchy. And Tony made this amazing observation in his book, which he kind of, in a super geeky way, he talks about it as fractals, right? Which is this self-similarity that you see all over, in nature. And he talked about sort of this, the customer pyramid. Chip Conley in his book Peak already also talks about some of these same things. But you have this idea of pleasure, passion, and then meaning. And he said good businesses can be built with that in mind. I mean you can start with, obviously a business has to be sustainable, it has to be profit making. But then you try to get into something that's a deeper engagement, with your customers, with your employees, and then you move on to something that hopefully transcends individuals or even the community, for that matter, and brings meaning, right? And when we met for lunch, when he was at Pixar, we started talking about this idea. There's a great writer at Pixar, Michael Arndt. He wrote Toy Story 3, Little Miss Sunshine, and his sort of wonderful idea is that essentially great stories are constructed in a very, very similar way. I mean, at the base of the pyramid, you have the plot. I mean, for a story to work, it must have, a story. It has to have some kind of a plot that moves. But then as you move up into the pyramid, I mean, the thing that lets us empathize with the characters in these stories is the fact that great characters, good characters have, they aren't perfect. They are not like Frank. They're broken in some way, or there's something that's missing there. And so there's an internal struggle. So as the plot is playing out, a good character will go through a journey and will come to a place where, hopefully they're in a very different place than when you started, and yet they're still true to themselves, right? And so I think that's the second level of that pyramid. And then at the top of the pyramid, what Michael says is that you really and he uses Star Wars as one of his favorite examples. And if you look at Toy Story 3, it has some of the same structural construction. But there has to be something that transcends, that takes you, even beyond that character and their journey, right? It's about. It could be something that's social, and it doesn't always have to be something good, right? It doesn't have to, but it has to be something that is universal, right? And so I think that idea really resonated with me, and it was really, again, with Tony kind of framing it as this fractal concept of happiness, or as he called it, the fractal of happiness. To see that again in the way that we can think about story structure was really interesting. And so as, Ashish and, my co-founder and I with Whamix, basically what we're trying to do is create technology that enables stories and storytellers of the future, right? That's basically our goal, and it's an ambitious goal, and so what. So basically, how do you think about that, right? And so one of the ways that we are thinking about it right now, especially when it comes to businesses and startups, is if you look at that pyramid, again, in your mind's eye, at the basic level, now we're talking about, let's say, products here, and how companies interact with customers, let's say, via their products. at the base of that pyramid, you need essentially products that work, right? You can't have products that aren't robust or are overpriced or whatever. I mean, you ultimately have to have an offering that makes sense, that's rational. But then if you move up into the pyramid, right, customers now, they are looking for products that also give them pleasure. It's not just enough to have a product that works. You want a product that gives pleasure as well. And if I had said this 10 years ago, that would have been a radical statement, right? That was before iPhones and before all these wonderful things. And now even like, VC funds have design interns, right? So it's like we've come a long way from like the 60s when, for example, IBM first started talking about good design is good business. Everyone kind of at this point pretty much accepts that in order to have great products, they have to be well designed. So then the question is, well, what's next? How do you distinguish yourself further from there? And if you look at the classic, Maslow's hierarchy and the whole like happiness fractal, the next thing, the next natural thing in that pyramid is meaning. And so now we get into this like very gray place. Okay, you talk about meaning. Meaning is super, super fuzzy. When we talk about, we went to Zappos this morning and for the tour, and it's very clear that Zappos has this great culture. But how do you describe it? It's a very, very fuzzy concept. And the way that most people think about meaning and culture is through stories. That's how we pass. When you talk about Zappos culture, you're not going to give them like, hey, here are here's the 3-page culture of Zappos. The way culture passes between us is through stories, right? And the way that meaning is created between companies and individuals or customers or employees for that matter is through stories. So again, the reason to come here was mostly to meet wonderful people and see what amazing things are going on with the Downtown Project. And as startup folks, I'd like to encourage everyone. We are, essentially as entrepreneurs, we are storytellers. And we are telling stories. And I think Kathy brought this up. We are always telling stories. And so it's good, it's good to step back and say, hey, is this the right story? Am I telling the right story? And furthermore, am I telling the story in the most effective way possible, right? And so that's kind of the message I'd like to kind of bring to our talk today. I'll sort of wrap up very quickly by saying just a couple of things about Whamix, because that's the space we're in and this is what we're trying to do. And we feel like, okay, so one of the things that we are thinking about sort of bottom up is if stories are going to become the key to how companies essentially, or the companies of the future that are going to be successful. Already, storytelling is not new as a concept to companies. We know that. But I think it's almost going to become, as with design, it's going to become a necessity, right? So then the question is, what do those stories look like? Do they look like the stories that you watch when you go to the theater or when you're watching television? And our thesis is no, not really, right? The stories of companies or the stories that communicate have to be more active than that. They cannot be passive experiences. They have to be interactive. They have to be stories where your users, your customers, your employees can become a part of that narrative. It's not enough to just present the narrative. And then the second thing is, we live in a world with lots of media, lots of communication all around us. So when you have inspired somebody with a story like that, how can you quickly, you don't want that to be a two-step process. The question is, how can you move them from there to action? And that action could be, them basically deciding to apply to your company. The action could be them buying your product, or that action can be them going to a social network and talking about this new product that they have experienced. It could be any of those things, but you want to really reduce that friction because you inspire them with your story, but then you want them to be able to act on that, to be again to be active with it. And those are the kind of problems that essentially we are trying to look at. It's like how, and again, I said, I know this is ambitious, and I'm sure we will be a small part of this ecosystem that I'm pretty sure that this is where things will go. And hopefully we will be a small part of that. So again, thank you so much.